Hello, everyone. This is Jack Mcdevitt. I'm the director of the Institute for Race and Justice. Some people are still joining us, so we'll give it another minute or two, and then we'll get going, all right? Thank you. Well, we'll get going. Thank you all again for joining us for this session on race, policing, and immigration. Again, my name is Jack Mcdevitt. I'm the director of the Institute for Race and Justice, and I'm very, very happy that you've been able to join us here for this important conversation. I want to particularly thank everybody for joining at this point of the year. For those of you associated with Northeastern, this is the finals week, and everyone is trying to get their work done. For the rest of everyone else, it's this incredibly busy time of year, and to take time to have this important conversation, we really appreciate it. So thank you. Just to offer a couple of opening remarks, and then we have a wonderful panel here that's been dealing with some of these issues their whole careers. So we have so much we can learn from them. The kind of mistrust that we're seeing day to day between the police and the African-American community is also going on between the police and the immigrant community, and has been going on for a while. And it's slightly different and more complex in certain ways. The folks who are perceived to be immigrants have a very well-founded confusion about the role that local law enforcement plays in enforcing immigration laws. They've heard things on the news about local police departments turning people over to the federal agencies, to ICE. There's 18,000 different law enforcement agencies in the United States, all with different jurisdictions. And for someone who's coming to this country from somewhere else, it's particularly difficult to try to, understand what the role of all those police organizations have. In addition, as you'll hear from some of our presenters, we've had a sort of continuous and really scary reduction in services to those communities. That programs that have been around for a while have less funding or have closed, and to be able to think about where immigrants can go for services in this community has become more challenging. In addition, the pandemic has changed the landscape for all of us and has made challenges that weren't challenges before. So that's made it even more complicated. And we've looked around at previous research and research we've done and research that's been done across the country. And we've seen that immigrants are attacked partly because people believe they won't go to the police, that they're afraid of going to the police, so they are a likely target to be attacked. And in some recent research that's been led by Carlos Cuevas and Amy Farrell and looked at biased victimization of Latinos, we found that Latinos are being victimized even more than is being reported to the police by a significant amount. And that it happens in the workplace, and it happens on the street, and it happens in public places. And so that community is being victimized in all different ways. And we're going to try to reach down into that a little bit and understand the challenges today of the immigrant community. I'm going to start by introducing Sam Williams. Sam's a friend. Sam's one of the original co-chairs of the IRJ, the Institute for Race and Justice, our community advisory board, along with Willie Rodriguez, who you'll hear from. Sam has been, a stalwart for community voices in these kinds of issues. He's the director of the Concord Prison Outreach and the founder of One Circle Health and Wellness. Sam truly understands, and he'll talk about it a little bit today, I hope, the role that trauma plays on our bodies and how trauma impacts our bodies in ways that we don't even know, and how that plays out physically, emotionally, and intellectually in the different decisions that we make. So, Sam, at this point, I'll turn it over to you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Jack, for those wonderful comments. Thank you, everyone who is joining us today. Just a quick highlight. The IRJ is a group of local community leaders who've been together for some time, really looking at important issues across both the city of Boston and Massachusetts in relation to race, justice, that impact children and families. And we've been in partnership with the city of Boston and a various number of nonprofits in Boston. So just want to first just acknowledge the board and all of the leaders who I've worked with closely. And I'm going to introduce two of my very high esteemed leaders who will be bringing us through the conversation today. As Jack mentioned, today we're living through some unprecedented time in regards to just a series of different social events that are taking place in our society. And yes, it is the case that when, large events and small events occur, they have an impact on the body. They have an impact on the mind, and they cause some of us to internalize these situations and others to react in them. And obviously with policing, we see that there's a lot going on. And so I'm excited that we've been a part of this series of really looking at race, police, and community in a conversational way to really examine and hopefully come out with some solutions and how we can really empower, educate, and start to address some of these issues. I want to acknowledge one of our very important community partners, which is the Youth and Police Partnership from Children's Services of Roxbury. They are both important partners in regards to the community work and our connection to young people who you will hear from some today. So I want to just acknowledge Ricardo G. Noel and Harry Harding, who are representatives of Children's Services of Roxbury. And I want to also acknowledge my co-chair. I'm not sure, I don't see him up here, but Madre Good, who's the director for Mass Hire, which is our local career center that's doing amazing work with families in Boston. So without any further ado, I want to acknowledge my two very highly esteemed partners and friends. And I'll start with Miss Olinka Briceno. Olinka is a community leader and leader and part of the leadership coordination for the Boston Community Leadership Academy and senior advisor for the Boston Public Schools. Olinka has a master's in education. And what I would say about Olinka is a fierce, and I'll use the word fierce. She's a fierce advocate and very passionate person about the well-being of young people and the conditions that we continually try to examine and address in Boston. So we are blessed and pleased to have her. She's extremely knowledgeable and very very clear on the important ways that we have to look at working with young people and serving children in the communities more effectively. My other colleague, Mr. William Rodriguez, he's an educator in youth and justice and advocacy at BU Wheelock College of Education and Human Development. William has a JD and a master's in criminal justice. I would say about Willie, he's a long-term Boston leader and community advocate for youth and adults in Boston, and specifically for the Latino community. Has a big heart, but is very, very critical and analytical around issues impacting children and families in Boston, Massachusetts, and the world, and very strong advocate for the Latino community. Last thing I would say about both of them, and I'll turn it over to Olinka, is both Willie and Olinka has also served as founding members of the IRJ Community Advisory Board for the past 17 years. So their commitment to this board and the work that we do is
Thank you. Thank you, Sam. Well, I am so happy and pleased to see the number of people signing in for this conversation, which is something that we're always trying to have, that we're always trying to go ahead and keep at the forefront of everything that's happening within our community. I am pleased to go ahead and be here and bring up issues that are very dear to my heart. It is, I don't see myself as fierce. I just think it's in my blood, it's in my DNA. And, I'm going to speak up to injustices and social issues that impact a lot of our immigrant community, our children, our women issues, and our youth, which is what my specialty has been for over 20 years working here in Boston. It's been a pleasure. This is my thinking tank, where the IRJ at Northeastern are considering my thinking tank. And these are the people that I come together once a month and, we brainstorm about all the wonderful things that we want to go ahead and see, the changes that we want to see in our communities and structural changes within the system. So I'm really glad to see people here. I am going to go ahead and introduce you guys to some of the members that we have here today. We're very lucky to go ahead and have the executive, Mishella Etienne-Campbell. She is the Executive Director of Youth and Family Enrichment Services. It's called YoFES in Hyde Park. She's passionate about youth initiatives in the Haitian community and works tirelessly to minimize educational, social, and health disparity among the Haitian youth and families. Mishella holds a bachelor's degree in math and a master's degree in applied sociology from UMass Boston. I'm going to go ahead and have her do her 5-minute, 7-minute piece, and then I'll go ahead and introduce the other two members that we have here. We have a team from Xavier Thomas, who is a activist, community leader at High Square Task Force, and he is a senior at Boston Community Leadership Academy. And we have our current Deputy Superintendent Cruz with 33 years of force at Boston Police Department. I don't know if I call you Luis or do I say Cruz, Miss Officer Cruz? I don't know. We're going to keep it very, we're going to call you Luis, very informal. Luis also possesses a bachelor's in degree of Northeastern University and a JD from Suffolk Law School. And they're going to go ahead and share a lot of the expertise that they have on serving our immigrant communities and the greater community of Boston. Mishella?
Thank you so much, Olinka. And I want to thank everybody, particularly Jack McDermott and Lisa Laguerre for asking me to participate in this panel, and all of you for actually coming on here to have the conversation again. It's an important one, I think, as Jack had said before. And as Olinka just introduced, I am the Executive Director of Youth and Family Enrichment Services in Hyde Park, and we're a nonprofit program that primarily deals with immigrant populations, primarily the Haitian population community in Massachusetts, which is the third largest immigrant community in Boston. Boston, or yes, in Boston, and actually in the United States, Boston is has the third largest population of Haitians. And so we have a very large community of approximately 70,000+ individuals living in Massachusetts, of which the majority of them live in Boston, in the Mattapan, Hyde Park, Rosendale, Dorchester, and Roxbury area. And so, being a member and a leader in the community, there's a lot of heavy lifting that takes place in our community, and we see a lot of issues. So our program primarily deals with youth, but we also deal with parents. We do parent education, and we do a lot of educating immigrants in the community as well. As just to really try to support the conversation from today, as we were talking about policing and race and immigration. One thing that we know, anybody who is part of the immigrant community, of which I am one as well, knows that when the world has a cold, African Americans have the flu, and in this community right now, immigrants have COVID-19. So there is a progression in the level of difficulty and in the nuances and the significance of when you're talking about policing in this community. And some of the main issues are that many immigrants in our community live in multi-status households. And so that adds a level of fear when you're dealing with policing in our community, particularly in Black and Brown communities, or Haitian, African, Caribbean, and Hispanic communities. Of course, we know that there are other immigrant populations, Asian, et cetera, but we're dealing with in Boston proper. For me, I'm dealing with the immigrant and Caribbean communities. And so in addition to there being, multi-status households, we understand that the immigrant community has fewer resources available to them. And with policing, there are also fewer remedies. And so when an immigrant is seeing coming to this particular country, not really knowing what to expect, trying to do their best to survive, you have a lot of different pressures that take place as well. There is a concern as to whether or not they're going to be receiving the resources. Obviously, we know with African American relationships and Black and Brown relationships for Americans in the police in the United States is difficult. And so for immigrants coming into this country, we see that, and it compounds the level of fear and anxiety and stress that takes place. And so I think the one big takeaway I hope that we make with this community, with this connection here, is that until we all really get to understand the other's perspective, we're not going to make any headway. You have to really try to put yourself in the position of what is it like to be an immigrant coming to the United States. There may be some that are out of status, and there's an additional fear there. I know that as we have transitioned from, the Trump administration to the Biden administration, and even during the Obama administration, there were a lot of stresses because the Obama administration deported a larger majority of immigrants than probably any other administration in our recent history. And so when we got to the Trump administration, we had extra issues because you had xenophobia, where there were a lot of issues of people not really wanting to see, immigrants coming into the country and questioning whether or not immigrants are worthy to come into the United States. And there's a lot of issues there. And now as we're transitioning into the Biden administration, we're hoping to see some changes, but those changes are slow. Obviously, he hasn't even been here for a full 100 days. So hopefully that we'll see something. But there are pressures that come to play. And even in my experience as the executive director of our program, I can say that when we started, there were a lot of young people, particularly, let me say, from transitioning from the Obama administration into the Trump administration, we were serving before approximately 500 families in the Dorchester and Hyde Park area. As soon as the Trump administration came on with the xenophobia, most of those people dropped off. They went into hiding. And they went into hiding because they were afraid that they were going to be deported, that ICE was going to come and raid their houses, they were going to raid the schools. And so a lot of them did not receive the resources. And so that makes you have to ask the question, ponder, when COVID-19 hit, when we were still in the Trump administration, how many of those individuals really needed the support and didn't get it? Because of the fears of not being able to access the adequate resources, or even asking for the resources because you're afraid of being deported. So there are a lot of stresses. And until we really understand from each person's perspective, and not really sweep under the rug the real issues, but really point out what are the real issues here and how do we come to terms with them and correct those issues, we're really not going to make headways. And so hopefully this conversation can be the beginning of other conversations that need to take place in order for us to really make headways on this matter. I'll stop there. Well, there'll be plenty more to say later. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I think you're muted, Olinka.
I'm so sorry. I thought, okay, there. I'm going to go ahead and introduce Mr. Xavier Thomas and some of the work that he's done at his young age to address some of the issues and to speak about, the youth perspective. Like, what is it to be a youth out there in the community and experience everything that's happening when it comes to policing? Xavier?
Hi guys, I'm Xavier Thompson. I worked with Hyde Square for 6 years now. And basically our recent thing that we did, which was so major for youth in Hyde Square, was that we went to the State House and we sat down with Etienne-Campbell and Sonia Chang Diaz at a state level to organize with the offices to talk about the legislator passed. It was so long ago, but it was so life-changing. It was an act. I'll just read it. Okay. So what we did was we went to the State House and there was a mass state legislator passed, and an act relative to justice, equity, and accountability in law enforcement in the Commonwealth. The measure banned chokeholds using tear gas on large demonstrations, and most knockout warrants were on where children were being stored, like for safety and protection, and people over the age of 65 who were just staying inside and being safe. People were just going in and knocking down doors because there was a protest going outside. So they used their place as a place of like shelter, I guess. I don't know why. And it also created a large, it created chaos. So what we went to the State House for was to talk to Etienne-Campbell and Sonia Chang Diaz to talk about what we could do to make a difference. And we stated a few ideas and she took it, and then we sat down in this big giant courtroom, which was kind of intimidating and scary, but it was very interesting. And we got to listen to her talk, and she stated our ideas that we helped her pick. And it was accepted, and it was so great. And we just like, yeah, we didn't know in a courtroom that you couldn't actually yeah. So like we did say, woo, and it was we were on TV. So we were just like, oh. And they said, you can't do that here, but please keep it down. And thank you for your enthusiasm. And we were kind of just like, okay. But basically, what I think we could do to help the situations that are going on around with youth and the world that they're going in today is to actually connect with one another. I mean, this Zoom thing is great, but there's not really real connection. It's more like you're talking and I can pretend to listen, or I couldn't even be here. I could be somewhere else and you're talking. But I think face-to-face interaction is more better, and it's more beneficial because you can actually feel the emotion and the empathy and the power that someone's trying to talk to you about. And you can actually replicate that and use it for somebody else and talk to them about the problem. And then it gets around and around and around. Because these days when grownups talk to kids, it's like they're talking to kids as if they were never kids. and they were always been grown, and it puts them in like, I'm authority and you're just gonna have to follow what I say. And that's why most of us don't listen, because you gotta remember that the fact that you're grown does not mean you weren't once a child and you hated being talked down to like that. If we have to find a way to where we could talk to one another like we were all teens again. And so far, me and Hyde Square have been finding ways to do that, along with benefiting the problems that are going on around, like police brutality and mass murder and all these other things. We're trying to incorporate how to connect with one another as well as solving problems and what we can do to make better. But yeah, that's all I gotta say. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much. And then now I'm going to have our Deputy Superintendent, Luis Cruz, to go ahead and speak from his perspective.
Deputy, you may be muted.
Okay. I think you're muted. There you go. Good. No?
Hey, Deputy Cruz, if you click that little caret next to the microphone icon, there should be something under there that says mic settings. Can you make sure it's set to the mic you typically use?
You got it?
Lee, you see where your
Button,
mute button is?
like the microphone button.
The little caret there, the little arrow that's pointing up. Click on that and see whether it's set to your speakers, your internal speakers or your microphone.
Oh my God, don't you hate this? This always happens to me. So I completely understand it. It's okay.
It happens to all of us, so.
I know. Can I tell you? Oh.
So while we get Louis unmuted, I just wanted to really quick, if I can interject a moment. So there's two things we've heard already. And by the way, I want to answer also Jordan's question around, are we covering, who are the immigrants we're covering here? It's a multitude of cultures, very diverse. It's all those who have the immigrant status in this country, and including those who are documented and undocumented. So we're talking about a multitude of statuses and a multitude of people. We can cover in this conversation what we need to cover. This is the beginning of a conversation to bring attention to the issue of immigrant youth as they navigate also this big thing that we are seeing right now in this country around policing and relationships among the immigrant community and police. And I want to qualify that by saying that this has been a community that in the conversation, they've been lost because in some ways they still suffer through the same conditions of discrimination and disadvantages that African Americans do in this country. There are still other areas, as Mishella mentioned, the fears of issues, additional challenges that we face: deportation, language barriers, and reduced access to formal services. And because of that lack of status that they have, and because we have also what Mishella mentioned, xenophobia out there, including in our systems and policies and practices that our government and our rules of law, that there is an added layer of fear of engagement and also of investment. So they rather invest more, government rather invest more on secure communities, policies, and law enforcement than they would on the services needed to bring about a sound life and quality of life for immigrants in this country. And there's a generational difference between adult immigrants who normally would be more sensitive to policing issues. Research has shown that they're more amenable to be able to trust and the police than the younger generation, which has grown up with the kind of attitude that young people have taken with police and the attitude that we have here as a country that understands the role of police. So sometimes they put a little too much trust in something that may end up to their detriment. But their young children often protect their adults because they're afraid that if they say anything to the police, they're going to deport their own families out of the country. So I wanted to qualify the comments, and I like the Xavier piece where he's talking about how youth, if you work with them, trust them, you activate them with his example around organizing and mobilizing them. They can do a lot to create better relationships, trusting relationships, but we have to meet them where they are, not allow them to meet.
Willie, it looks like Luis is back on.
Good. All right, so I'm done. Pass it on back to Deputy.
Welcome back.
Yeah.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, yay.
Oh, excellent. It was said something about the host was not allowing me to unmute for some reason. I apologize for that. But I'd like to, from my perspective in law enforcement, and being, like I said, a son of an immigrant, I think the most important thing for police is we have to learn how to do community engagement with immigrant communities. I have an advantage, obviously, because I am Latino. I speak the language. I speak Spanish. Yeah, I can relate to the Latino community of Caribbean, Central America, South America, in terms of being raised in a Latino family. So community engagement is very important because there is an issue of trust, and I'll go further into that in a second, but there is a level of trust among not trusting police, because most Latinos come from Central America, South America, even the Caribbean. The police there, it's a different policing. It's not, you have due process, you have a right to remain silent. And there's a lot of corruption and a lot of abuse of minorities, of people who come, that's why they come to this country. There's an issue, obviously economics is an issue, but there is a lot of issues with policing there, and most of policing there is done by their military. They don't have local police departments. So that is the perception when they come here and they see the police, they think that policing is the same in this country as it is in the countries they come from. So we need to engage them and try to build the trust with them. And we can't do that when we go to a crime scene or there's something involving crime. We have to do that where they feel comfortable, whether they feel comfortable, church, community centers, youth programs. This is where that we can maybe bridge that gap and not be in a hostile situation where it's confrontational. So that's the most important thing, is community engagement. We go into cultural awareness. Obviously, not all police officers look like me. Many of them do not, unfortunately. That's a story for another day. But the issue that I think is cultural awareness is we have to educate more our police officers on different cultures that live in the city now, that live in this country. Cultural awareness is very important because they understand that not every culture is the same, and the different things that we do as Latinos, or if we talk about the Caribbean, whether it's Haiti, Jamaica, the cultures that we have are different, and there has to be a cultural awareness so we can relate. There's a lot of myths too, like I spoke about earlier, in the policing system in this country, as opposed to Latino countries and also countries, other countries where the system of abuse is in military style of policing is a lot different than here. I understand that we have issues and we have to improve, and we need to accept our own responsibility, and we need to improve the law enforcement that we do in this country. But as police, in the city of Boston, I think we're ahead of the curve. I'm not trying to brag or anything, but we do community service officers in each district. And the community service officers we have in each district reflect the community that we serve, whether if it's a Caribbean, if it's Latinos, if it's Asians, we try to work with those minority communities through the Community Service Office and educate them and engage them to work with the needs that they have that are different than ours here as immigrants in this country. I'll leave you with that. And then the last thing is, I've never worked with immigration. I've never, and we are a sanctuary city. There is some case law now that's going through the court system that protects us from having to engage with federal agencies and stuff like that. I think the most important thing is us working within the community. I think the community service house we have is a good system, but we need to improve, and we need to also be more proactive and engage in the communities that we serve, all the communities. Thank you, and I apologize about that not being able to log on earlier. I'm almost as old as Willie, so I should get a senior citizen discount.
I just can't outlive the years of knowing some of my best friends on this webinar. Well, thank you for all the panelists and for your remarks. I want to tie in a little bit more, add on to, because I was giving some briefing around what Mishella and Xavier did before, and Louis, the perspective you gave on policing as being a police officer. And by the way, Louis also comes from and I call him Louis because he was my student in criminal justice at Northeastern University. He actually was a computer science major, and he switched over to criminal justice when he met me because I had a very convincing tone, and I'm very proud of him. He's a deputy now, and he was also a lawyer. He went to Suffolk Law School at night with a family, but he comes from a family of activists in the community. I worked very much with his father, rest his soul. He was a very vocal champion around the community, did a lot of the community engagement. So Louis was one of those that became a police officer, but had very much a grounding and a background around community. The way he understood our cultural nuances and idiosyncrasies. That's what he was referring to, that in order to have officers that look like yourself, those officers, when they come from your own community, they understand some of the things when it comes to privacy, sharing information and all of that, and making us feel at ease. An officer can do a lot if they even say a salutation to the community in their own language, in that community's language, and you watch how our defenses go down. That happens even in the courtrooms when we have interpreters and we try to put in interpreters. So we have to do a lot to break not only the issue. When you talk about trust, you got to also break the issue of language, and there's a language barrier. And right now our schools don't do too well by our English language learning students too. We lump them into special needs classes when what they have is a language barrier, not a disability in learning. So we have a lot of mistaken beliefs around people's identities, and the immigrant community really tries to preserve that identity when it engages with other people from outside their communities. And we need to keep that in mind whenever we want to develop these relationships. But I will now want to open it up to questions to the panelists, and Olinka and I will moderate those questions back and forth. I don't know if Olinka, you wanted to add a little bit more on what I was saying.
Wanted to go ahead. I know when you were talking about engagement and community engagement, I know that East Boston, for example, had years ago was a place. There's a place where there were having there were officers that were assigned. They were like the liaison to the Latino, and I think there's a Cambodian community there too in East Boston, Chelsea, where they were doing these academies. I want to call them like academies. Like they used to do like traffic violation workshops and stuff that they were offering in the community or community centers, in churches and so forth. has that continued? Do you think that was helpful? Like when you say, let's meet the community where they're at, is that what you're envisioning, what you picture?
Yes, and also a lot of it is also around youth. We have it's a group called Llegó, Latino Law Enforcement Group of Boston. And what we do with our youth is we have a police academy that we run to prepare young Latinos, and it's open, it's diverse, open to females, African, it's open to anyone. But what we do is we try to prepare them. If they want to go into law enforcement, we run an academy there. So we train them to what they have to do physically and also academically. And it also makes them aware of what law enforcement is about. But we do other things, and we try to be active in the Latino community. We try to engage with El Mundo, whether they do like a job fair, things that could benefit our community.
Yes.
Mostly around youth.
Which is a very, from just the policing piece and how to reach out to this community, it's a very important tool to partner up with the local media, the native ethnic media, so you can go ahead and get messages across and inform the public of things that are happening in the community in their own language. So yes.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I mean,
Okay.
if I could add as well, I don't know if you all can hear me, but if I could also add, I think as we're talking about how do we kind of bridge a gap and make it so that we are having better partnerships with the community, immigrant community and the police, I think it starts with partnering with small organizations or the organizations who will have their boots on the ground. And I know as Superintendent Cruz said that Boston has done a pretty good job in terms of making sure that, in Mattapan, you have a good number of African-American officers in Hyde Park, and you have different ones there. And the fact that they're acknowledging that there needs to be more is great. I think having boots on the ground, being able to meet the people where they are, to me, means that we're going outside of the box. We're going to, the city of Boston Public Schools has a program, the Office of English Language Learners, which my program works very closely with. They have a DLAC, which is departmental or different groups for every cultural group in the Boston Public Schools. So there are Haitian ELACs, which are different groups where they all meet together. And you have Haitian police officers. You have, I believe one of the chiefs is Stanley Davis-Mayer, who's a good friend of mine, that are there. And you have different police officers that can come and participate in these programs and talk to the parents about, what are the programs that are in the community for their children. Or even go to a church and be a part of the church. Or if you have police officers that are part of various churches, let them have an activity or something that happens where the entire community or that congregation can really feel like we have an asset in our community. That's a police officer that if anything happens, I can call Officer so-and-so, and that person would be my person. Those type of things really go a long way in terms of making the community feel comfortable. But again, at the end of the day, I think it's important for us to definitely push on cultural competency, because right now, in general, there is cultural incompetency that takes place. People don't really understand nuances. For example, there are some cultures, in Haitian cultures and in Asian cultures, various cultures, that when a subordinate sees somebody who is ahead of them, they don't look at them in the face, or they don't look at them in the eye. They keep their head down. But to a lot of Americans, it's disrespect. And so we need to really understand the nuances so that we can get a better connection between the immigrant population and with the police. It's difficult to learn everybody's culture, but when you can show willingness and niceness and take away those preconceived notions in terms of what people look like, because I don't look Americanized. We have to, as an immigrant population, and even as Black and brown people, we have to conform to our societies. I have to tell my 15 going on 16-year-old son that he cannot wear a hoodie to go everywhere, even though there's nothing wrong with wearing the hoodie. It's a fashion statement. They sell it for a reason. It makes a lot of money to purchase it. And there shouldn't be anything wrong with him going into a store wearing a hoodie on. But I have to tell him, don't wear a hoodie, because what people see and perceive of him could very well get him killed, even if he doesn't do anything wrong, even though he's a straight A student. I mean, that doesn't matter. But people look at your outside and they listen to your accent, and they automatically assume something. And there needs to be this level of cultural competency that is so important. And we need to, again, I'll reiterate, we need to go into the point where we are standing in each other's shoes and respect where each other comes from in order for us to move this conversation forward.
Thank you, Mishella. I want to encourage people, if they want to put their questions on the chat, if they don't, free to do that. We'll try to pick Olinka, if you can do me a favor and watch. If anybody raises their hand, they can use also the feature on Zoom. I do want to ask a question of Xavier. Xavier, as a young person who's worked with adults before many times, you know, you're still working with them, and sometimes you know, I always say the adults need to get out of the way so they can help Xavier thrive, right? But how do you, based on the other groups, I know Hyde Square Task Force has a tremendous group of youth that you work with. They're all from diverse cultures. They all come different backgrounds. How do you get along? What can you teach us about how you come together on this particular issue? And what can you give us as advice that we should need to do in order for us to do better, including, you know, all these institutions, police institutions, our organizations, our government organizations? How can we create better relationships with the group you represent?
Well, okay. What we do, I guess, kind of, is since we all get along, it's kind of, I don't want to say it's forced, but like in order for it to work, we all like first have to be forced into like, okay, so it starts out forced a little. You have to get forced in like to these individual groups that are not people you know, and you have to go around and keep switching. If there's somebody you know, you cannot be in that group, and you have to keep switching and switching until you meet everybody, and then like you know everybody, so then you can be in a group, then the group gets bigger. It's kind of like a group meet. So like what we do is we have these games, but first we all have to meet each other, or else if you're gonna like call out someone's name and you don't know their name, the game's not gonna work. But there's this game, I forgot what it's called. I think it's Where the Wind Blows. But instead of calling out anybody's name, you go in the middle and you say something that applies to you, but might also apply to others to get others to move so you can take their spot. So like I would say, the wind blows to anybody who likes pizza, and whoever moves, they have to move to switch a spot to take wherever it is, and whoever ends up in the middle has to do it, and then it goes around and around and around. It only takes about a good 3-5 minutes. I don't know. We don't take that much. And everyone's laughing, and then all of a sudden everyone's just talking to each other, even if they don't know each other, they're just talking to each other and they're laughing, they're having fun. So it's like, I guess, to get along with each other, there has to be like, in Hyde Square, I'm not saying in the world this has to happen, but like there are little things that bring people together, like maybe a tiny game or a conversation that you guys have that you and the other person have knowledge on that you can carry out for more than 5 minutes. I think it's, I don't know.
No, that's pretty
Yeah.
good. You're trying to, if I could just maybe put that in context.
Yeah.
You're adding social enrichment activities that an adult can facilitate while you all engage and get together, mutually start developing common bonds and common relationships. What I wanted specifically to know is what makes you trust the adult? What makes you trust if someone approaches you, because you seem to have mentors and guides, and without being forced, what is the welcoming traits that you have as a youth that we should consider? Right? And that can give us an opening to say we should be treating youth the same way and bring them along, because you've been able to engage, advocate, be a voice, empower yourself. But we want to know what's the secret sauce, Xavier. So give us the secret sauce, because we're adults who don't always have success with engaging young people. You got to tell us. You're the specialist in this.
Well, what makes me trust the staff, to be honest, is that the way the staff like present themselves, it's not like a grown authority way. I don't want to say it's childish, but like they present themselves in a childish way that makes it amusing for us to like, you know, okay, then I don't know. I guess every staff at Hyde Square has a great bond with everyone. It's because they're just open, and if there's ever a problem, they don't see it in like an authority way, like, oh, so I'm the authority, so this is how it goes. I don't care what happens, this, that, this, that. They try to put they try to put themselves in each person's shoes who is involved in any problem or just any situation in general. If someone could just be talking about something, they all of a sudden have empathy and they like can feel themselves in that person's shoe, and they just converse back and forth, and it's just, I don't know. Hyde Square's staff has great
Yeah.
ones. What makes me trust them is that they are always open, they always listen, they don't interrupt, and even if someone says something that you don't quite agree with, they'll wait after, and then after when they say it, they don't say it in a way that like kind of mocks you or contradicts what you say. It's kind of like a question, and then it's like in a nice, warm, inviting way. But yeah.
That's really nice. And you know, I think you're also saying, I think Christian Arthur on the chat put it in context as well. Sounds like Xavier is saying that cohesion and understanding doesn't just happen, but it comes through intentional work. And most of those adults that are working at Hyde Square do it intentionally. They also have to allow themselves to be vulnerable. And that's something that I bring back to Deputy Cruz, because that's the part that police struggle with. They don't see themselves as always vulnerable to the situation, because to allow themselves to be vulnerable would allow themselves to give too much to the community, because they need to still be perceived as an institution with power and authority.
Well,
You can challenge me on that one, but that's the mindset.
I think and when you're young, I mean, I've evolved. I've been on this job 33 years. When you're young, yeah, you got that machismo, you know, I'm a police officer, but I think as you evolve, it's like an athlete. Okay, I can't do the things I did when I was young. I can't chase Xavier, because obviously Xavier, I'm not going to catch him. But if I talk to him and engage him and treat him with respect, I think I can get a lot more. I can get a lot more accomplished. And I think that's how, you know, like we evolved as people, we evolved as adults. And we can learn a lot from these young kids nowadays. A lot of things that they're doing in the community and stuff, that they're also an example for us. But I'll end it with, you know, like you mature, you learn that, you know, there's better ways to communicate with people and you know, and it has to be, you treat people with respect, and they'll treat you with respect. And that's what it comes down to. We have to treat each other as like human beings. No one's better than anyone else.
I like to open it up. Other people who want to ask questions of our audience wants to ask questions, and participants of the panelists, and anyone at the Institute, and even sharing information of some of their own relationships at work with youth and police. Some insight that you will want to share. I will also welcome those as well. We're here to learn and have a conversation, not just about because all of us are here still learning a lot about this. We have a pretty dramatic environment right now that trust is the last thing we're looking at, and even hope has become diminished. The pandemic has caused us to come out, and one of the things that resonates with me was what somebody with Christian again said about greetings, and saying that it should be a broad base, that everyone should greet each other in some languages or some way that brings down and brings more of an emphasis on care and sensitivity. But we don't have that right now. We're under a pretty much a storm of divisiveness and sentiments, and resentment and violence has spiked immediately. People are coming out of the woodwork and carrying firearms. There's a lot of stuff going on out there that and the conversation I'm having of hope is right here, because right now I walk out that door and all I see is bam, bam, bam. You know, it's just a little crazy environment. So we need some answers. We need some thoughts. We need some sharing. So I want to open it up to the.
I think I want to put out there, and for us to kind of talk about, and perhaps Superintendent Cruz can lead off, as an immigrant coming from an immigrant community, as immigrants are looking at what's happening on TV today, where you have people who are from this country who may look like us but are not from the same country as we are come from. coming from that have limited resources themselves and may not, well, they have the resource, they have the recourse in terms of, or they have some level of remedy, not total remedy in terms of when things happen. How should immigrant populations feel, or how do we change the perception? And let me change the question that way. How should we change the perception of immigrant populations when they come to this country not having having fewer remedies and resources that they need, and are turning on the TV and seeing what's taking place on TV? How do we change their mindset to know exactly what you were saying before, that police officers, that you yourself as a police officer or somebody who's in law enforcement understands that police officers are supposed to be here to serve the community and keep people safe. And it's not quite like, the countries that they might have left, but in reality, for some people, they're turning on the TV, and when they see, police officers randomly shooting at people with no guns or no weapons, it feels a little bit like perhaps where some people have left. How do we change that perception? How do we have the conversation? How do we make people see it in a different light?
I think and I understand the issue of not trusting us, especially, like if you don't have, like citizenship and stuff like that, that there's systems that we do have. We have, you can give us information anonymously. We have a text that you can, so you can give us information anonymously. I understand that there's an issue. Like I didn't, like I've lived in very dangerous communities where I wouldn't talk to the police, but if I could go to the police and give them information and my name wasn't in a report or was, anonymous, we have ways for people to give us information without exposing them and putting them in danger. I think the department doesn't do enough to put that out there in the community, and I'll take onus on that. That's something that we've used in the past. It's been very productive. I understand that if you live and people maybe don't understand, maybe you can relate to me, and maybe Willie, if you live in a dangerous neighborhood, you're not going to be as forthcoming as someone who lives in a nice, like if I lived in Beacon Hill, maybe I'd come out and, that'd be a different story, but I don't live, I don't live in a rich neighborhood or a neighborhood where I'm out in fear that there could be retaliation against me, or retribution. So we need to put more emphasis on that. I think I'll work with the department, and there's tip lines that we have, and there's ways to get information to us that doesn't expose the person who gives us the information, and we can work on that information to try to resolve some of these crimes. And there is an issue of there's a lot of issues. There is a lot of issues now, like Willie said, there's a lot of young people out there involved in violence that is affecting our communities, and we have to find a way to address that and not put anyone in harm's way either for retaliation.
I think one idea that I've played with even in terms of having a nonprofit, as we are looking to do various educations with the community. The one thing that we have found is that the best way to get people to come out and to engage is to offer incentives. And I think that's something that perhaps police departments and people who are in law enforcement, or the powers that be, who have the funding. I don't necessarily agree with defunding the police, but I do think that there could be resources that are used to incentivize the community to come and participate in conversations. If you offer, teenagers who are during the summer $20 to come in and meet the local cop and play basketball. If you win, do a basketball tournament in your, in the neighborhood, and say, the prize for the team that wins, versus the police officers, if we win, you have to spend a day with us. But if you guys win, you guys get to split a pot of 150, a pot of $150, and you split it together and you guys enjoy. And then there's some type of a camaraderie that develops. When we're doing programs, we have to offer incentives if we want kids to come learn about, sexual education or finances or something else, we offer incentives for them. We give them $5, $10 to come and participate or to do something and to learn something. And that may be an idea. I'm just throwing out ideas in terms of what can be done. That's an out of the box way of thinking that could make young people really engaged, for that the community and the police department can have a better relationship.
well, I'm not going to be try to be funny here, but if the police win, all the kids got to eat donuts, okay? But on a serious note, what we need to do is what I've thought about a lot is to try to get a lot of these universities that don't pay any taxes in the city of Boston, to try to get them engaged to work with us and try to help kids at the schools, like tutoring programs, stuff like that. Even to get the schools involved in trying to get these kids scholarships. So I think we need to, the sky's the limit on things like that. We do a lot of the stuff that you mentioned, but because of COVID, we haven't been able to engage with the young kids. We have summer programs, some of the youth programs. We take kids out on a harbor cruise. We have some harbor patrol boats and stuff. We take the kids out on these boats. So we do a lot of stuff. We have like a tennis program in Mattapan, off of Talbot Ave, that we do engage with young children in. But I think that we need to go beyond that and to try to, in terms of equity, education, employment, we need to expand that so that our kids and the future of our people of color could have opportunities that probably some of us didn't have in the past.
Yeah, I think the truth of the matter is that the young people that are engaging in a lot of the services that the city offers, a lot of them may come from immigrant families, but they themselves, they're not like first generation immigrants or people who have just come into the country, because again, there's a fear there. And so we lose that, pool of people. But then it could also be kids who are higher risk young people. Are not necessarily participating in a lot of these programs. And then you have to meet them when we're talking about meeting people where they are. Sometimes we can't rest on, some of the other programs. You've got to kind of do the extra step to get out and do more. I'm just kind of throwing out ideas.
No, but I think I'll end with this. We have school resources. We have a lot of officers in the school department. And a lot of times, most of the times, we have diversion programs. We don't arrest these young kids. What we do is we take them to court, put them in diversion programs. In that program, they don't get a criminal record. They're put in a program to try to help them. That they have to follow the program. And a lot of times, it's been very productive. There's the things you don't read about in the paper and stuff. But the last thing we want to do is, and we don't want our school system to be a pipeline to prison. We do a lot of resource work with young kids that have issues. Obviously, I'm not trying to be stereotyped. There's no father at home. There's economical issues. They don't get the resources that they need, which is, this is the reality. We try to get them resources through the court system, not with a criminal record, but resources that could help them and put them on the right path.
So
Willie,
I'm sorry.
I know that like one of the things that that I've actually seen that has worked great, and I usually think that, especially with like immigrant communities, it's all about the relationship. And if I trust Mishella, I can go ahead and say to one of my families that I work with, I'm going to introduce you to this person. And if you can call her, you can go ahead and talk to them. They will go ahead and do that. And I know that for some of the youth that I've worked with at some of the different schools and so forth, we have like some officers that are assigned to that school unit. And those guys, they come in and they're there. They come in and participate with students, but I think you have to role play that for the students. You can't just go ahead and be like, oh, here's a couple of officers that are here. They're going to talk to you about life issues and so forth, and leave it at that. It's like they have to see the officers their interaction with the community leaders, with the activists, with the community partner. And then based on how you role play that relationship, the students and the youth will be like, oh, okay, yeah, I know, I saw Olinka, Mcdevitt or Briceno speaking to so-and-so, that must be somebody that I can approach, and that's somebody that I could like start a conversation if I had a question and so forth. So the partnership piece of partnering up with like those community leaders that in our community, in all the diverse community, is huge, because that's how you like role play this to families and to these immigrant communities. I know that I interrupted somebody. Anyways,
No, you
what
didn't. You didn't interrupt. I was just going to kick it over to Roxanne. Roxanne is working with homeless children for the city and has been dealing with issues of stability and that with a bunch of different groups in the city. And I was just wondering if you have some thoughts on this issue, Roxanne. She's a member of our board as well.
Thank you. Of course. Thank you. Thanks for passing it to me, and thank all of you for your comments earlier. I just wanted to add on and say that the Mayor's Office of Health and Human Services has really been looking at the intersection of human services and how can we touch young people in these different ways that we're talking about on the phone. So for example, the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Advancement has an immigration clinic that serves people before pre-pandemic here in the building and is continuing to do that virtually. And so as we think about how can we expand services and meet folks where they're at, really proud to say that I'm looking at a partnership right now to bring in lawyers specifically who would support young people experiencing homelessness and be able to serve them in that regard. And so I think it's important that we continue to look at what services are already currently happening and how we're building those relationships and connections to the community, and then how can we expand on those. So wanted to lift that up and say thank you.
Thank you, Roxanne. I wanted to continue to probe questions. And while we, people have been mentioning the relationships and everything, I'm going to go back to mentioning I'm going to pose a couple of questions and thoughts here, because while we're trying to work on developing relationships and everything, and as much as I know, and I know Louis' work and deputy and all that stuff, there is still a problem with the institution, the police. And while, I worked with as an advisor to Ed Davis, former commissioner, on Latino affairs. And one of the things, and I also worked with him in Lowell when I dealt with the Cambodian community there, Southeast Asian. And I also have a brethren of many advocates out there that work with immigrants in the legal side and defense side and everything. And one of the problems, and I did this also in New Orleans in my immigrant worker organizing immigrants there, who were very much afraid of the police. And oftentimes, because we're a sanctuary city, I'm glad you brought it up, Louis, that in those other cities that are not sanctuary, the police really are in another arm of ICE. And some of these officers, they decided that even in Obama's administration, we deported 1 million immigrants, and they called it a collateral damage because it was supposed to be applied to those who were doing criminal offenses, which were only 20% of the people they deported, which were about 1 million deportations that occurred during the Obama administration. So everybody misinterpreted the law. The law and the policies always get misread, misinterpreted, and they get lost in translation when the people who have to enforce this do not know what they're doing. And in a lot of ways, I also consider, while the police is there to protect and serve, is also in my history working in both ends with both law enforcement and with the defense. I've often seen that we are on contradictory terms. This includes even the prosecutorial power, because they use those kinds of levers to intimidate these communities, to not necessarily address that the fact that they are, and we have research showing that they're one of the highest victimized communities in this country, and yet they want them to participate and engage with the police, but then they threaten them with if they don't participate, with deportation. So there's a contrary, there's a paradox in this relationship between the police institution and the fact that we want to build better relationships to address a community that we often, as an institution, keep oppressing and keep threatening and putting them at risk. So while that's understandable, there's still a lot to be done within the institution itself to dismantle the mentality of the officers on the train, and the training and education that goes on. And that goes with one of our questions. Why the police, when you said community service officers, Why don't they hire immigrants and community and more officers of color? What is BPD doing to that, and in a deliberate way? And by the way, while it's important that the police they have so much also influence over how others, security, private security, school officials can influence even enforcement, because they don't want to do the school's job. They don't want to do the security officer's job. They often tell those who have zero tolerance policies to say, stop doing that, because we don't want this kid we don't want to arrest this kid. So you do have a lot more power and influence over that. But if you want to educate that community, that community, you have to go in there, and like you've done, Louis, you've been working hard behind the scenes trying to recruit officers of color. And you know the internal politics that goes on in these institutions when they're trying to hire, when they use a civil service exam to impede people of color to get into becoming officers. They also put sometimes the achievement level of these officers at a place. And I know that because I've worked on it behind the scenes. I've done where they've impeded officers of color to become officers in the police department that need to be out there in those communities representing them. And they don't, in that academy, has to be done, transformed, totally deconstructed, because what they're teaching them is not cultural competency and cultural awareness, cultural sensitivity. They call us the last day before you're going to send 75 cadets out there to then deploy them to teach them about how to deal with racial and ethnic communities. So this is me playing devil's advocate. This is me playing the advocate and the passion that I am. But while we can talk about how good these things can come about partnerships and trust, there is still so many problems with this institution. So that's a long question. So I welcome comments from you. And I welcome
in terms of police reform, a lot of the police reform that was incorporated in Massachusetts, the police academy, the Boston Police Academy has already incorporated basically everything that's in there. We already do that. We do sensitivity training, de-escalation. Is there room for improvement? Absolutely. There's absolutely room for improvement. Is there issues with civil service, with trying to get people of color, women on this job? Yes. Have we filed lawsuits, organizations that I'm members of? Yes, we have. And I'm not going to deny that. There's, as I said earlier, there's always room for improvement. But I guess you could say the struggle continues. We have, I am a police officer. I do my job, but I work for the community. I don't work I work for the community, the people I serve. Now, is there things that we need to do to improve? Absolutely, absolutely. Have we done a better job than most of the rest of the country? Yes, we have. But there's always room for improvement, and we do need a lot more people that reflect the community to be part of this department. I'm with you 100%, and I respect you as my sensei, so I'm not going to disrespect you.
Yeah.
Somebody has a question, has their hand up? Sam has
Yeah,
it.
did somebody? Sam had a question. Sam, go ahead and go, just because I know that you're probably going to bring a topic that I was going to bring, but go ahead, Sam.
No, I was just looking at a comment in the chat that.
No, I saw it too.
You
want to read it, Sam?
Well, it's kind of long, but I think what he is saying is a pretty, he's talking about bringing voice and all of the principles and practices that the panel are talking about, but he's really asking the question of how do we really get professionals, adults, police practitioners to embody the principles that we're talking about, the relationship, the understanding cultural differences. What are the mechanisms, right, that we might need to think about to take the conversations to a level where people are actually living them, breathing them, and actually being them? Because the conversation is great, and we know how conversations can continue for generations and things never change. So are there some thoughts on how we can spread the embodiment of these principles?
I think we have to push the envelope, and a lot of it is training, and also is, we have to change the culture. If you change the culture and you have the training, and you have to hold, people accountable. You know, the police department has to be part of the community, and the community has to be part of the police department.
Do you think that within some changes that I know that they're coming, I mean, I know that there's a lot of training being put in place to make law enforcement more cultural competent to the different cultures. But I think that the one piece that I know happens is that, you know, we're working with like a traumatized community. There is the issue of trauma in these communities, trauma from back home, trauma from the abuse here. It's a long history of it. And the one thing that I kind of see, you know, when I drive around and I walk around and so forth, is that lack of understanding of how traumatized our community is, you know. And I think the officers, I mean, I know that there is, you know, there's a lot of stuff being presented to at the academy about, you know, trauma in the brain and so forth. But there is, you know, we're working with a very traumatized community. And where does that, how does the department, you know, I mean, I know from a school perspective, I mean, like I work at from like Boston Public School, and we have Lucinda who's in here too, that we can talk about. We know our students and our families have experienced, you know, the poverty and the disparities in the community, which traumatizes them. And then we expect them, you know, to come into our school. We have our students that come into our schools, and there's like one clinician for 5 schools. You know what I mean? It's like, the bare minimum is kind of being done. Where do you guys see like that happening? Like what kind of training or what kind of, and then, you know, what do you guys see for the department of like expanding on that? Because it is a traumatized community.
I think we have to work a lot closer with public health in terms of, you know, and then there's other things too, like I was on a panel I recommended, and I'm gonna throw Willie under the bus again, but I mean, back in the 60s, there was a group of Boricuas, Puerto Ricans, that they were called the Young Lords. And what they did was they went to the schools, or before kids went to school, they gave them breakfast. And if you look at it, like a child, the most important thing is nutrition in the morning for his brain to expand. I'm thinking outside the box. I'm not just talking as a police officer, I'm talking as a parent or the person of your community. We need to also, you know, work with other agencies. We need to have a holistic approach. The police can only do so much, teachers can only do so much, public health can only do so much. But if we all work together, and we know it's city employees, you know, city agencies, we have to have a holistic approach. We can't just solve these issues on our own. But it is imperative, it's important that we do everything we can to work with our youth, especially our young kids in this community, because they're our future. So what's important is health, obviously, you know, nutrition and education. And I think that's where we start. If we can start there with other city agencies, we can expand on that. Yes, we have issues, but I think the most important and our most vulnerable are our children and our elderly. And that's who we need to focus on at this point right now in a crisis that we're in.
I think I want to just add.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, Mishella. Go,
Go,
no,
Willie.
go ahead. I just wanted to.
No, I was going to just add and just say that the police are here to protect and serve, but they're not the ones who write the laws. And we also have to have a conversation in terms of, you know, the legal system. What are the laws? We need to, unfortunately, one of the issues, particularly in immigrant populations, is that they do not have a voice because they cannot vote. And so when it comes times for elections to take place, and we have these legislators who only come into the communities when it's time for them to be elected, and they're not really listening to the immigrants, because the immigrants are not the ones who are voting for them. There needs to be a coming to Jesus where everybody comes together and says, we have to really look at these laws, because the police officers can only do so much. They're here to enforce the law. But if the law is no good, then what do you expect them to do at the end of the day? So here you have, for a lot of immigrants, you know, we just, I don't even know if it's really, we've gotten over this, But a lot of them are, you're not allowed to have a license, for example, if you're an immigrant, or if you're not legal in this country. But a lot of them are still working because, obviously immigrants, although people don't like to see immigrants coming into their countries, a lot of businesses love immigrants because it's cheap labor. And so there's a catch-22 there. And so a lot of these people, they have to survive. So, should they be afraid to get into a car and get a license and drive? And if they get into a car and they get a license and they drive, and a police officer stops them and finds that, technically you're not supposed to drive. And so for that reason alone, you have to be sent, to prison or to jail under ICE, under ICE, whatever, lockup, and then possibly deported. All these are silly little laws that really need to be looked at. There are little things. We criminalize a lot of things that should be immigrant enforcement, or immigration enforcement gets criminalized. And so we need to really look at the laws, and we need to look at and talk about, how does the community, the larger community that can vote, really band together and look at what's really going on? How do we support these communities and get people to vote and rally so that the laws can be changed, so that police can enforce and do what they need to do to make the communities better? That's just
I think to encapsulate it, there has to be, again, what the deputy said, a holistic approach, cross collaborations across sectors together. And I think when it comes to increasing voice, this is where the youth could be really, really central. Young people like Xavier and a team of young youth-led, they've been able to mobilize and change laws, change education laws, to even evaluate teachers. So if we can do that in Boston, like Youth on Board did, when the student advisory with the school committee did, to transform the state government around being more sensitive in educational application to their kids, and they mobilize together in such an organized way, it can happen too. And when it comes to criminal justice reform, which includes in there a better protecting and serving institution like police. And I wanted to ask back a little bit of deputy, because is the commissioner, I don't know if you've had conversations, but usually these kinds of changes and transformation, we're talking about transforming police, right? People are talking about defunding it. People are talking about reforming it. You've mentioned many good things about what you do as an officer and as a leader. At the same time, you have oversight of a commissioner, that of a superintendent that works with the mayor's office. That's where the example is set. And they set the agendas about how to transform their own institutions. And there are many situations where police departments now across the country, in particular certain specific ones, are doing some really transformational work within there. That includes looking at their academy training. That includes by bringing in more diversified work, creating a diversified police force. That includes creating better communication lines with the communities that they serve, and really training their officers and looking at even issues from psychological mental health, because believe me, trauma is not only affected by the victim, but the police officers also gets traumatized a lot. And we have a lot of suicide rates, substance abuse, stuff that goes on in these departments that the institution is not prepared to handle. And if we're gonna put somebody out there that doesn't understand and is mentally health with a gun on their belt, then we got a problem. And so, is there anything going on in the current police department now to really look at itself and say, we're doing some good things? Boston has been in the forefront for a lot of things, community policing being one of them. But are they doing anything to ramp up and improve? Because we've gone to 10 years of a lot of stuff going on, and these police, many of them have gone backwards as opposed to forward.
There's things that are being done, but I think there's a lot more that can be done. I'll just leave you with that, because we're in transformation right now. We have an acting commissioner. We don't have a police commissioner right now. We're going through transition. We've always tried to diversify. There are issues that come up, but we need to think outside the box. And I think that some of that stuff was suggested, like if you're a student in the Boston public school system, which are many people of color, you should be given preference to go into the police academy. These are things that we need to expand on.
Well, I guess I'll step in. We're sort of running up on a time, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I want to thank all the panelists. and for the moderators. This has been a really interesting session. And all of your comments, Mishella, Xavier, Olinka, Willie, and Deputy Cruz has been really, really helpful for us to understand. I think, you know, the themes that you stressed were the needs for partnerships, the needs to go outside our comfort zones and meet other people. As Mishella, as you said, the understanding the perspectives of the other people, trying to put ourselves into their position and seeing it that way. I'm really happy for the voice of youth. Thank you, Xavier, for coming and sharing your thoughts, and how the best relationships are the ones we treat each other with respect, regardless of our age. I think Nate in the chat for making some suggestions of, you know, using the principles of procedural justice, where we could get a chance to, you know, give people voice, give people understanding of what's happening to them, spend more time conversing with people, even in official capacities. And also the challenge to maybe empower the immigrant community, as other states have, by giving them the right to vote and being a part of the political process. So I want to thank you all for that. I think it's been a great conversation, and I appreciate everyone's thoughts. One more quick reminder, or two. I want to thank Lisa Laguerre for all the work she puts into making these work. This has been another success, thanks to all the efforts you put into getting the right speakers and bringing people together. So thank you. And I want to make the last pitch, which is our Shulman lecture. Our final lecture of the year is on May 18th. It's Alexis Harris, and a faculty member from the University of Washington. And she's going to be focusing on how the poor are disadvantaged within the criminal justice system. Things like small fines and a whole variety of other ways that the poor are, you know, put in a difficult position and fall farther behind quicker because of their poverty, basically. So we're really excited to have her come and give a talk on that. And I just wanted to, you know, say thank you to everyone and say how much we appreciate your time and your evening. Wonderful
Thank you for
panel.
having
Thank
us.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Everybody was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Xavier. I really